know we're at home, but I wanted to make you feel like you were at home on the podcast. So
I
I brought.
appreciate that.
I,
I appreciate that. It's very
I
kind
mean,
of you.
I'm gonna get my kind of fanboy moment over here right off the hop.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. So I grew up watching, say, Much Music, and again, I don't know if you're familiar with wrestling, so I might kind of cut you a kind of a face promo and a heel promo all at the same time. But I grew up watching like Much Music, watching Rick Campanelli, yourself. I believe it's like Leah or Leah Miller. I never get that correct. But yeah, I grew up and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like this is Canadian based. And then, just watching you do, I think I kind of fell out of love with Much Music when they started drifting away from doing essentially what they were made to do. And then I was having this conversation with Rick Campanelli, and I was like, oh yeah, like George Stroumboulopoulos went to do The Hour, and then it turned into George Stroumboulopoulos Tonight. And while I was at my Carlton days, I was actually taking tips from how you were doing interviews, not just with, your Canadian acts, but like guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin,
Right.
Regis Philbin. I'm like, okay, these are big names, and here he is just sitting there like calm, cool, collected. I'm like, how does he keep this all together when he knows right across from him he could be getting a kick to the gut and a stunner?
Yeah, that's right. Did you ever listen to the radio show Live Audio Wrestling?
I have a few times, yeah.
So it used to be called Slam, and it was created by Jeff Merrick, Bob Makowitz, and me. The three of us created that, and it got turned into Live Audio Wrestling, the law.
Okay.
So I know those wrestling references for sure.
Yeah, because like I think even when you started the interview, it's like you went to shake or he shook your hand, and then you're like, DTA, don't trust anyone. I was like, oh, just looking at his face, he was almost like, what did I sign up for? But then when the interview started going, I was like, geez, like he's a really kind of engaging guy. But yeah, like I give you props because that kind of got me interested in kind of like late night TV in the Canadian aspect.
Right. Very cool. Well, hey, I'm happy to be a part of this. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, no worries. So let's start off right from the beginning, like, because I know you got a birthday coming up. So this is COVID. What are you doing during your birthday?
Nothing. Excited about it. I'm generally a very solitary person, even though I have a public life and I do like to go out with my friends and have a good time. It's very easy for me to just slip into a very solitary existence, and that's kind of what I'm built for. It's kind of what I like. So I will sit back, I will air pop some popcorn, and I'll probably see my mom and my sister that day. We'll have like a little socially physical distance, hi, how are you? But I haven't been in Toronto for my birthday in over 10 years. So this is like the first time I'll be able to spend it with my family in a long time. But then I'll just sit at home, I'll watch a movie and I'll relax. And who knows where we'll be in the NBA playoffs by that point, or the NHL playoffs. So I'll probably just be watching a game.
Yeah. And at this point, you're probably like bittersweet of watching Montreal, hopefully.
Listen, Montreal and Pittsburgh would be a disaster. But here's the thing: if the chances of them getting the first overall pick are, not great. So no greater than anybody else's. So I don't even know if it matters.
Yeah, but it gives you that kind of, I guess, hometown kind of story, right? Like if it's Montreal, they have now Drouin on board, and then you get Lafreniere. Like, it's just, of course, the Montreal crowd would eat it up. But the only part I feel bad about for the kid is you're the catch-22. Yeah, you're in Montreal, but you're in Montreal.
I would say this, that if you're going to be that kind of player, like everybody says they are, then they should be able to shine in Montreal. Like the real G's can step up, in the face of enormous pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you tell me a little bit about, I guess, kind of growing up. Like, where did you get your interest in radio and television? Because I hear that you started, or I've got it here in the notes, but you started at the Fan 590. But like, take me through the process of getting to there, number one.
The Fan was my third. I think it was my third station I worked at by that point. I didn't have any interest in TV at all. I loved the radio and wanted to be on the radio, but didn't think you could be on the radio. So to be honest with you, I never thought about it. I didn't how do you go get a job on the radio, right? So I was a movie theater usher. I delivered newspapers. I was a sandwich maker at Subway and Mr. Submarine. I was a forklift driver for a cargo company at the airport. I would unload limestone and fill in ditches and landscaping jobs. That was just my life, and I assumed that was going to be the rest of my life, to be honest with you. I'm not a guy that grew up with much grand ambition. I thought I would be I'd like to be a filmmaker, but again, I didn't quite know how to do that. And also back then, in my neighborhood, I grew up I went from a place called like Jane and Wilson, North York, Jane and Finch, Rexdale area, to Rexdale to Malton. I didn't know anybody with cameras, so it wasn't like now where everybody could film anything they want and you can edit on your phone. There was no connection to the industry for kids like us back then. So I just got a job at a movie theater as an usher and just thought I would do that, to be honest with you. And then I went to go get a motorcycle license, and it was at an adult learning center for Humber College, which was right beside my radio station, the movie theater that I worked at. And I saw in the course calendar radio broadcasting, and I said, oh, screw it, I'll just take that. That's honestly how it happened. And then I was thinking I was going to do radio forever, so my friend built a pirate radio station in Rexdale. I did that for a bit. Then I went out to Kelowna and did a radio show out there in BC. But I'd never thought about television. And then I ended up getting a job at a radio station in Toronto called The Edge, which was a music station after The Fan. And around that point, I had established myself as a bit of a music fan. I was going to a lot of shows. People were starting to get a sense of my energy levels and and the way I viewed the world as a broadcaster. So then I hosted a comedy show that went on some channels out in Ontario. And then honestly, then all of a sudden I got a call to go be at Much Music. Like, that's kind of how it happened. I've never really thought about television. And even though I've had a pretty good career in media, pretty strange, wild, varied career, I've never been the guy that had a dream. And because in my childhood, my family, my neighborhood, we don't get to have careers. We had jobs, right? So the idea that I would be like, yeah, I'm going to go be on the fucking television, people would be like, are you crazy? It doesn't happen. So that's kind of always been my approach. And it sort of still is my approach. I still approach every job I've ever had and the next ones I do with the same energy and the same kind of approach.
No, I think it's interesting that you kind of brought up all these kind of points, right? Because it's like, watching Much Music now, again, I'm only like 28, so you could be like rolling your eyes and be like, oh no, 28-year-old. But
I was 27 when I got the job at Much Music.
Well, exactly. And like, you know what? This is where I think some people kind of find it humorous. When I send out stuff to program directors or even to Much Music, and I'm like, hey, remember those good old days where you guys used to show? And they're like, doesn't work anymore. I'm like, yeah, but it can. It can. And then they're just like, those days have come and gone. And I'm like, why couldn't I have been born a little bit earlier?
Well,
because
it could still work. They just don't want it
to. Exactly. But it's just like, growing up, and I remember being homesick from school some days or even on Saturdays, and I would glue myself. I know it's more or less based for, just say, a teen to adult audience with some of the later stuff that they did, like, going to the beaches and doing like summer. But like, I would be watching like Much Music countdowns. And I said this to Rick, and I'll say it to you, that like the cast on that show, like some things that you'll see on YouTube, you stick to one person. It might be like a What Culture Wrestling, but you stay for Simon Miller. Everything else is no. But when I turned on Much, and this is kind of where the heel side comes in here, I would see like Rick come on and do a countdown, and then I'd see you. But at this point, you were basically someone like an 8-year-old watching it, all piercings, like the gelled hair. I was like, what? How did this guy get in the door? And then like, you're telling me about punk music, and I was just like, oh, okay, this is his stick, or this is his thing. But as I kind of grew up and watched it, and even if I find old clips, I'm like, this guy's very informative. You can see that he's dedicated about what he's talking about. But even just doing like the Much News, I kind of watched it, and it was like, as an 8-year-old, I'm like, skip. But as I started getting older, I was like, geez, like this is journalism. This is music journalism. And you did well for yourself with it, because look at where you're to now.
Yeah, it's a bit wild if you think about it. That lineup when I was there, Rick, Bradford, Rachel Perry, Sukyin Lee, Master T, Namageni, Ed the Sock, Amanda Walsh, like Rainbow, It was quite a lineup. We were part of a really. Larissa Gulka was there. Um, Simon Evans was still producing. Like it was, and many more people. It was quite a lineup, and I was really. We sort of look back now, going, "My, how lucky were we that we got to be a part of all this?" I was lucky because I liked, heavy music. I like all music, but I was able to, because I was a little bit older and a little bit more experienced. I was able to do a lot of the bigger interviews at the time. Because I was the kind of person, if an interview went awry, I was built for it, right? So I felt like I could do any genre and be a part of anything. And I felt like if the other VJs got other big interviews, I was happy for them and wanted them. Like we were kind of in it together. They didn't all feel that way, but a lot of us felt that way. We were kind of all in it together, and it was really awesome. Like Rick and I have the best relationship, and we had the best relationship then too. Like we were genuinely invested in each other's success. And what was the difference between that and how media has evolved is we actually really cared about the audience. Like we really cared that the people watching, we knew you were young. We wanted you to expect more from yourselves, expect more from your culture, and expect more from your artists to be better, to be stronger, to be more inclusive. We wanted that for you, right? To be, and if you weren't feeling strong, to feel safe around people who were. Like this is the thing that we really cared about.
No, and I think it's really cool because again, when you said you were about what 27 when you got the role there, so like I'm
28,
so like I'm 28 now, so just imagine like if I'm walking in that door at Much Music, just say back then, I'm thinking, great, this is a gig for me, this is something I'm interested in, but I'd never imagine it to be a part of just say like a Canadian kind of music history or culture where people even my age look back and be like, it's almost like we're 80 years old sitting in chairs going like, oh, man, I wish we had like the Much Music back then. But we grew up in a time that was great. And like, I think Rick put it on the spot when we interviewed him and he said, you come in every day energized because who are we interviewing today? Stone Temple Pilots? Who's on next? Backstreet Boys. And you're like, this is Canada. These acts are coming to Canada.
Yeah, man.
You have a crowd outside your window screaming. You have a crowd around in a circle, and that like they're getting interactive. And I'm like, dude, like that could still work today. But it's just so nuts to look back at. I think I said to Rick, if they ever came out with like a Much Music kind of Netflix that you looked at the history of that, I'm like, people would look at me like, wow, like that actually happened. I'm like, yeah, a person was literally maybe 3 or 4 seats away from Avril Lavigne, not knowing who Avril was at the time, but you know who she is now.
Well, what was interesting about that time was they were the original influencers, the VJs. But you had to be about something. You couldn't just post a picture of you vacationing in a spot wearing very little, or looking fit and just going, when I like to get away, I go to this resort, which is what a lot of influencers do today. Back then, if you behave that way, the rest of the VJs and the producers at Much would kind of steer you into, if you're not about something, you're not about anything. And that was, even if it was just like, not everybody had to be punk rock and serious, but you still had to have values. And that's what was really special about Much Music, and the VJs get a lot of credit and they deserve it because they were amazing. I was so lucky to work with them. But the producers were pretty incredible there. And the senior management even at the time was really, it was kind of a perfect storm of where everybody was on the same page.
No. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like how you said like you had to have a passion with stuff, because I find now and this could just be me talking here, but like, when you're going into jobs, when you're doing interviews, I find that sometimes someone will say like, that doesn't come across very passionate. It looks like you did it just to, get an interview, or, yeah, you did your job. And then sometimes you'll be surprised because someone will say, yeah, I'm only here for 9 to 5. Like, this is what I do 9 to 5. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, if someone came to me 10 o'clock tonight and said, Brian, you got Ava Max to do an interview with, I wouldn't sit there and be like, I'm off the clock. I'd be like, all right, give me 5 minutes. I will slip out of this. Boom, let's do it. And then, you're gracious because they'll come on and be like, did I wake you? And like, no, this is great. But you're actually saying it's great. You're not just putting on a face.
No, it has to be great. Like, otherwise, what's the point? Like, when you're in the public eye and you get to interview people who inspire others and you get to share music with others, that is a gift. The cost of admission for that is you better give a shit. If it's just a job for you, get lost. There's a million places to go be in the media. This ain't it.
Yeah.
And I'm
But
unrelenting about that. Like, I know everybody's like, oh, everybody works differently. No. If you're not motivated from within, and if you're not passionate from within, you don't deserve to be on Much Music or any of those places. Get lost. Go somewhere else.
yeah,
This is a place that, and you can tell because, listen, man, I've been on the air for almost 30 years. I've had shows that have been way bigger than Much Music. Like, I've had a lucky career, but people talk to me about Much Music more than anything I've ever done. Why is that? Because it mattered.
yeah.
And I was so honored and so lucky, not honored, privileged to be a part of that, right? So we took it super seriously, and look at the legacy of it. That crew was an amazing crew. I was so lucky to work with them.
Well, like, yeah, I mean, and I don't want to just harp on like just the Much Music side of things either, because again, like you've gone and done other things. It's just like to me, when you have someone like a Rick Campanelli or yourself, that's like I call it the mainstay. Now I know there's other names, but when you get a chance to talk to someone like you kind of want to bring this stuff up just to, get the mindset. But
I'm
I
always
just
happy to talk about it.
yeah, like I just loved when you guys had like, and it sucks now that's not there because I would have loved to be a teen in Toronto at this point. But like when you used to have like the Much Music Video Awards, and I used to like, I was so jealous. Like I'm not gonna lie, like if I seen you on a street today and this is our first interaction, I'd be like, fucking George Stroumboulopoulos got to cover Emma, and it's like Brian. Leave it alone. It's not even around anymore. I'd be like, no, I'm gonna go up and tell him how I feel.
No, dude, the MMVAs. Sorry, my phone just went off. I had the hockey game on. The MMVAs were unbelievable. That was the best weekend of the year in my mind in the city, were the MMVAs. Because it's interesting. You talked about how you had all the people coming down and knocking on the glass and screaming out the window, right? Which is true, happens all the time. But what was really interesting about it was that you had kids coming from all across the country just to stand on that street corner because of what it meant.
Yeah.
Because what it meant. And plus the building was cool as hell. The building looked cool, right? And it was in a cool place, and it looked like if you go through my record collection here, right, you're outside into the alley, hang a right, go down, walk for 10 minutes, and you're at Much Music. Like I live right where Much Music is. And it's and I pass it all the time, and it's amazing. It's so much fun to be a part of.
So like I know this is probably a different vibe from you, but like I sometimes reminisce of even when I go down to like my old elementary school and nothing's changed. Like these are the same, bricks that you walked on when you were 5. So like when you're walking now, I don't know if they've made changes, but when you're walking in that area, do you like kind of stand in a certain point? Not like you're telling pedestrians as they walk by, like, this is where I did this, but like, do you get that kind of vibe sometimes? Like, this is where I stood when I did this interview, or this is where I was here when we did this.
Sometimes, always. I always walk by it and I look at it and I'm reminded of the cool things that happened there, the fun that we had there. But we, it's funny because Much Music's on the corner of Queen and John. CBC TV, News World, CBC Main Network, CBC Radio, and Hockey Night in Canada were all at the corner of Wellington or Front and John. So I have been, and I still have a radio show with CBC, I've been on the air on that street for 21 years, on almost 21 years on that street. So that street is like my entire Canadian career, essentially, for the most part, is right there on that street. So the whole street is kind of wild that way.
Yeah, no, and I kind of want to mention, because getting away from the Much Music side of things too, I guess the hour, because I mean, when you left Much Music, you went right into the hour, like kind of a different format. I know it's still interviews, but like you're the kind of focal point here, having a guest on. What kind of led you to leaving, I guess, Much Music, creating this show, and also like knowing now that this is your own kind of hour? What was going through your process or your mind?
I didn't really want to leave Much Music, but it was new management. It was a different direction. I didn't really vibe with the direction. They were mostly cool to me about it. They wanted me to stay, but I just got a sense it was time. I had done 5 years at Much. Things were changing there. It wasn't as. It was getting a little bit more. Well, you know what it turned into. So it was going down that direction, which is fine. Which is fine. That was a choice. But I just knew that something was up. And plus, you don't really often get an opportunity to launch your own news show and launch your own talk show and no one in Canada really gets to do that. There's only been a handful in the last 100 years of however long TV's been around, 80 years.
Yeah. No
So,
kidding, George.
oh yeah. So I thought, if I have the opportunity to be one of those people and to do it the way, and listen, we did it for a decade. Like, what a success. Very few ever last a decade as a nightly. So we had an amazing run, and I just thought, what the hell? Let's go get it. Let's go get it.
Yeah, like, because I mean, off the top of my head, when it comes to mind, now I'm Newfoundland born and raised, so
Yep.
it's like, Rick Mercer comes to mind, Tom Power. Then you
Dude,
got
CBC
yeah,
has been hiring people from Newfoundland and Labrador and Halifax. Like, honestly, whenever I hear Canadians bitch and complain about CBC being like Toronto centric, I'm like, CBC ignores Toronto. They only hire people from the East Coast. They only hire Atlantic Canadians or Maritimers or people from the West Coast. Like, all of Newfoundland and Halifax was on TV at CBC at one point.
yeah, except for me, George. No, no, no.
Well, pretty much everybody else.
Yeah. No, like, it's funny because when I was actually talking to CBC the other day, because we were just on because we're trying to promote the podcast a little bit more through platforms, and I had even mentioned to Tom Power. I was like, man, I'm not up against you in any way, but it's like, dude, like, I'd love to have your seat one day. And he was just like, he's like, well, when I go, they might just be looking for, like, okay, where's the next Newfoundland host to? It's like, you're not gonna advertise it. No. I'm just like, okay, but
that's CBC.
I just think it's so funny because, like, you look at these names and, for as much harp as people will give Newfoundland for, oh, you're an island, you don't get a lot of exposure. I'm like, geez, it's a catch-22 for me, because if I ever want to go into the media, then I'm looking at people are here in Newfoundland going, like, is he going to be the next Rick Mercer, next Tom Power? I'm like, okay, easy. Like,
but
let me get off.
Honestly, it could be anything. I mean, CBC had that big setup in Halifax, right? That studio. So there was lots coming out of there as well. So yeah, look, CBC has done the best job of representing Canadians for the most part, certainly better than anybody else has. So, but look, we all host a show and then we leave the show.
Yeah.
Somebody else has to take place. If you want to host Q, then you got to make yourself undeniable to be the person that hosts Q.
Yeah. Well, it's just so funny because I look at it too as because when I was actually starting this podcast, I'm a big fan of Conan O'Brien. So, like, watching him go from the late night show to the night show, kind of getting that ripped away from him, and then he made the joke, and, like, always self-humorous, always a class act, but he's like, I'm calling the show Conan, making the humorous joke of, no one can replace me when I call it Conan.
That's right.
And I was like, I have to call this Tobin Tonight just because, if someone else comes out of the wing, I'm like, no, you have to be a Tobin, and you have to do it this way. And then they're like, okay. And then I'm like, there you go. I can't be replaced. Watch now, midway through this interview, I get a call. Tobin, we actually got your replacement in for George. I'd be like, no.
But here's the thing. You want to be replaced eventually, because it is your job. It is your job to create something that will last beyond you. Right? Yeah, so it's actually, it's your response. They give you the keys to the car, you drive it for a while, and then you hand it over to somebody else.
Yeah, just pass it back with a few bumps along the way because you were the rookie driver, but no worries.
Exactly.
But I guess with your time, because I want to ask you how it became, I guess, the hour to cutting it down to a half hour. Was there, like, a reason for that? And who are some of your favorite interviews during this time?
I think we cut it to a half hour because we moved to 7:00.
Okay.
So CBC they were experimenting with local news. They were experimenting with viewership. They were experimenting, and I think they ran into some, they needed a show to be on at 7. So that put us on. I knew it was never going to work at 7 because the show that they wanted me to do, I didn't want to do, but you do your job. I'm a loyal teammate. So when they said, hey, we need this, I'm like, sure, we'll do it.
Yeah.
But 7:00 is the wrong time for that kind of show. It's ridiculously wrong time. But it was honestly just to fill in. It was just they needed a show there. So that's it. But then I think that it did go back to an hour.
Yeah.
At some point, I can't remember when, but I think it did go back to an hour eventually. And then we were back on at 11:00. We were doing 7 and 11. It was a strange time there. CBC is always like, always trying to figure out ways to make the budget work. It's expensive to make television, and ad dollars aren't what they used to be. And there's always, I was on the air during the Harper run, right? So I didn't care that much about the CBC. So there were a lot of things, but also I like when shows evolve. It keeps it fresh. So, and then they were going to name the show after me before, like back when I first went there. CBC, the person in charge of news at the time, wouldn't let a show be named after a person.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was just because CBC is very much was at that time very much did not want stars.
Yeah.
Not want. It's very Canadian. Canadians don't really. The Canadian industry doesn't really want you to be a star. There's, well, at least it's designed that way, right?
Yes.
So certainly back then. So we came up with the name The Hour, and then eventually when new boss came in, who understood stars and like not stars, but understood the idea of building a star culture in Canada.
Yeah.
They renamed the show after me.
No, I think that's really cool. The other thing I want to mention though is like, because I kind of gave you an example of some of my kind of key interviews that I liked that you did. Just because, I grew up watching wrestling, so Austin was a big one for me. Regis, of course, with just the occurrence of what's happened recently. But like, I grew up watching Regis, and I don't mean this in an offensive way to him, but like, he reminds me of kind of like my nan, because that's where I would watch it. I would watch Live with Regis Kelly in mornings that you didn't have school or that you were off, and this is what nan watched. So I was like, and he just had that kind of self-humorous demeanor. Like even watching him on How I Met Your Mother going off Barney, where it's like, where's the sub? It's like, I don't know, Regis. And I was like, okay, he gets it.
Yeah.
Like he's very entertaining. But what were some of your favorite interviews?
I mean, there's so many, dude. It's hard to nail it. But I was very lucky to interview Patti Smith and Michael J. Fox, and Alan Thicke was amazing. So many social activists, June Callwood, authors like Gore Vidal and Stephen King, and Margaret Atwood and Chuck D. Like interviewing Chuck D, Cypress Hill, and interviewing the Sugar Hill Gang, like legends of music, right? Interviewing Coldplay, U2 over the years. Angela Davis, one of my heroes, was on the show. I interviewed Oprah 8 times.
Oh, wow.
So many artists like that kind of they reach you in different ways for sure. But I loved talking to authors and directors. Was usually like Quentin Tarantino. I loved interviewing Quentin, D. Reese. Directors and authors were the most entertaining to talk to because they truly they're equipped to talk about their craft. They weren't playing cool.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes when you're interviewing people, you have to kind of get through the artifice of it's television or celebrities, right? But directors and writers, authors were a little bit more comfortable talking about their thing. So I always really enjoyed speaking with Tarantino. Was like, I loved talking to Tarantino.
Yeah, no, like I can imagine it's hard to pick some favorites because you've done it for what was it like, so 2005 to 2014. So but what's that, like maybe about 10 years or so?
We did 10 seasons.
Yeah.
But thousands of interviews.
Yeah, exactly. So to pick out a few,
like 3 or 4 a night sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, like I laugh at it because when one of my friends asks me like, who's your favorite interview so far? I'm like, I've got 80 odd episodes right now, but like even me, I'm trying to pinpoint, like not being disrespectful to Axe, but it's like, I grew up watching Colin Mockery on Who's Line, so to me that was the first big get. But I always want to praise the first person who ever comes on a podcast or a show when you have nothing to basically send them. When it's like, so like Jimmy Rankin, to me, it's like his wife goes like, oh, like, can you send us some stuff? I'm like, yeah, I've got nothing to send you. But would you do an interview? And Jimmy was like, love to, East Coast. I'm like, represent. Yeah, but
he's great. Jimmy's great.
Yeah, but like that's like your first one because that gives you a leeway to go places. So like, for example, now when I have you on and I send that, they'll be like, oh, well, who are some names that you have on? And if I go George Strombo, someone will be like, oh, perfect. Okay, good. That's a name. We can use it. But
if it helps, I'm happy to do it.
If it helps. I kind of want to mention this with the hour as well because, and again, not in a mean way, just, curious mind here. When we see you on Much Music, gelled hair, laid back, piercings, when you're on the hour, this kind of stuff kind of goes away. Like the metal shirts are not always there. It seems a little bit more tidied up. Like, was that a CBC thing or was this you kind of growing up a little bit?
But those first few years of the hour, I still had the nose rings and I still wore the black t-shirt and the same set of belts. None of it went away. In fact, it was all still there. The difference was I didn't have band shirts on it because if you have the metal shirts on the air, different networks, you have to clear the rights to use it, right?
Yeah.
But no, in fact, CBC asked me not to change because they didn't want people to think they asked me to change. So I still had my nose ring. I had my spiky hair. Dude, nothing changed about my thing except for the logos on the shirts. Same jeans, same shoes, same belt, same T-shirts for the most part, for years and years. But it's interesting, when you're on the air for a long time, you got to evolve. You want to grow up. You want not grow up. You want to evolve, because if you do the same thing you did 20 years earlier or 10 years earlier, why? Right?
Yeah.
Why? But look, I mean, I'm still wearing my metal T-shirts, in my regular life, and I wore some of them on. I still put Slayer on the show, so none of it really changed. Obviously you go to late night talk shows, but what I didn't do is put on a suit. That's what every talk show host does, and I wouldn't do that.
No, and that's something I was actually going to get into, or a little bit of credit there, because it's a very, I guess, Canadian aspect, but laid back approach. It's like you're in jeans, you're in a shirt. Like maybe at times it was a little bit more business casual, in the sense of some interviews when I looked at it, it was like a little bit dressed up, but not overly dressy.
Yeah.
But like I always thought, like, okay, just the vibe that it had, two red couches almost there, just sitting across from each other, audience there. It's not like you're sitting behind a desk where you kind of have a barrier between you and the act. It was very opened.
Well, here's the secret. Here's the secret to your outfit, and this is part of the reason why mine evolved over time. You always dress the venue, right? You always dress the venue, because the venue, your set, however you design it, you think the set should look, you can't look like you broke in. You gotta look like you belong, right?
Yeah.
So you always got to dress the set. And so as our set changed, I would adjust my outfits to work with the set.
Yeah. Because I'm just trying to remember like the sets, because I know like sometimes, if I'm correct, it seems like the music changed a little bit. Sometimes the intros changed in terms of like doing a video package. And I saw that, I was like, okay, that's a growing up process. Now, like your question way, or like your way of doing interviews, yeah, it might have evolved a little bit, but it stayed the core, which I liked. Like, again,
sometimes it's not, you're not growing up. The thing, what you're doing is you're freshening it up, because the audience, people watching hear a song, they just go, oh, that's this part again. So sometimes you change it up, right? So a lot of it is just keeping things fresh and tweaking it to try to keep yourself interested as well. At some point, I'm like, I'm bored of that tune. Let's pick another one.
Yeah, no, I thought it was just interesting, because like even over the years when you watch like a YouTube clip now, you can definitely tell if it's a later season and just the video packages. But I'm like, okay, like I mean, to bring back a kind of a Conan reference, when he was going from like late night to Tonight Show, people were criticizing like it's time for Conan to grow up, and Conan said, I'm not doing that. Like, you can, just because I'm going to an earlier time slot. And I was like, I think I sat in the seat going like, whew, like, thank God, like we're still getting Conan. But that's what I felt like when you were doing the hour, and it's like, okay, still doing the same style, because heaven forbid at one point you turn on and it's like, I'm George Stroumboulopoulos, and welcome to the hour. I'd be like, you're not George. Where's George?
Yeah, it's right. No, you gotta. And you know what? It's a very delicate process. It's not easy to do, to kind of evolve your style when you've been on TV for a long time. Because there'll be people who still say, "How come you don't do this?" And I'm like, well, because I was 28. I'm 48 now. It's different. Like, you grow as a human being.
Yeah.
And if you are exactly the same 20 years later, like, your core values should be intact. But if you're exactly the same, then have you not learned anything, right? So it's a delicate process. I have found the secret to this business is to care how people feel, but don't care what they think about you. Like, you want them to like you, but you don't need them to like you. And you have to decide, what are you comfortable with? Like, for example, Conan made his choices about the Tonight Show. That's why Conan's not hosting the Tonight Show anymore. He's okay with that. Like, not everything is going to go the way outside people expect it to go if you're making your choices, right? So you gotta make choices. You gotta pick where your compromises are. You also have to understand that when you're doing a show, like when I did my show and when Conan was doing his show, or anybody, yes, it's your show, but you are also representing a really important team. Yeah. And so it's not just you. It is, you are the front, but you are the producer and you are the lead of it, but you still have to recognize that it's not just what you think today. Otherwise, your show's going to be narrow, right? Yeah. You have to reflect and respect the crew that you got around you. That's the key to it.
Well, I mean, just to bring up the last point on Conan before we get into the other topic there, but I kind of like how, when you mentioned like with the team, because in my mind now, I'm very like narrow when it came to this stuff, but when Conan went from LA and then to do the Tonight Show, I was like, oh geez, he's gonna come right back to New York now to do Conan, because that makes sense. But then you're thinking, he's brought his whole friggin' team out to LA, He didn't want to go 12:05 for the Tonight Show because of, the legacy that had, even though
Yeah.
I guess NBC kind of just said, like, fuck the legacy. But um, I just thought it was really interesting because once he kind of dissected it a little bit more, I'm like, okay, because if it was me on the spot, like knowing that I'm not as many years as Conan or whatever, if someone said that to me tomorrow, I'm like, it's only me and Bradley, or it's only me and him. Yeah, okay, Bradley, this didn't work. I know we've only landed here. Let's move. But you forget that sometimes these people have families, kids rolled in school. So when Conan actually came out with that, at first I was like, stupid move. And then when he said it a little bit more, I was like, all right, stupid Tobin.
And you know what? There actually isn't even a right way to do it, right? You just got to do the thing you want to do. And I think I think Conan has, of all the late night talk scenario, like the person that was my favorite, aside from Dave or Jon Stewart, was Craig Ferguson. Right?
Yeah.
The way you are about Conan, I was about Craig, right? But Conan is one of a kind, so special. And of all of the people doing late night talk now in different versions, Conan is making by far and was the most interesting things.
Yeah.
Not counting, Bill Maher, John Oliver, that and Samantha Bee. That's a different thing, right? But like that sort of like interview talk show desk guest format thing, Conan's like travel stuff's incredible. Conan's online bits are incredible. Yeah, I think Conan has really hit a sweet spot for who he is, at least for me as a fan.
Yeah, like and it's just like, Conan to me was like in the 90s, so I'm just kind of growing up. So I've seen him a little bit more as the Tonight Show and late night. Right. But when I watch some of the stuff, like some of the classic bits that some people are like, well, that's not classic, but like the New York bit where it's on strike and he's literally going around in a car picking up people, and someone goes, yeah, like the I think she says like the bus or the train doesn't go all the way out there, and she's like, that'd be lovely, and he just looks straight dead, looks her in the face, go like, yeah, that's not happening. And like even if it's planned, I'm just like, just that humor of, this might not go as well as we wanted it to, but okay.
He's so comfortable. He's so comfortable.
The last thing I kind of want to mention here as well, because I feel this would be a little bit more of the difficult topic, but you seem like a laid back person. So
nothing difficult. There's nothing difficult about talking to me, man. Like I can handle anything.
Okay. So like you go from the hour to doing Hockey Night in Canada. Now for me, I like the idea. I thought like this was going to be great because Rogers is kind of going into this youth movement. Little did everyone know that it was going to kind of be a bite in the ass, because young people, as much as you want them to do stuff, sometimes they're just not involved in it. Like, I don't know, like, and the Canadian teams were doing bad as well, but I like the approach. Like, I like that you were a host. I thought, okay, we're getting rid of Ron. Not that anything was wrong with Ron. It's just that we want another person to come in.
Yeah.
And I just think it's almost like you taking a bullet. Now, feel free to like jump in when I get this done here, but like, teams aren't doing so great. Rogers is just getting the deal per se. I didn't like certain aspects that they were doing at Sportsnet, like of showing a big screen where it's like, and here you can see, it's like, no, I just seen it. Like, you don't have to show me on a bigger screen. You don't have to have Nick Kyprios hold a stick to show me the stick handle. Some of this stuff is like, as a host, I'm like, oh, that gotta be hard to draw in a crowd. But how was your time there? And like, what did you take away from it when they kind of said, it's time to go?
You know what? I enjoyed large parts of it. I knew it was going to be a challenge to go. It's funny you said that thing about youth, because you know what they told me? That when I was the host, the ratings went up for women and people under 30. So it actually was working.
Yeah.
The issue is that there were myriad reasons why it ended the way it ended, but there are very few people in the history of this country that get the opportunity to host Hockey Night in Canada, and I got to check that box, right? They hired me to do something. I could have done it. When I got there, they didn't want to do it. So it went the way it went. But that's TV, which is okay. Also, it's a really high-profile gig that everybody has an opinion on.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important, like, one thing you'll never get with me is I will never make my decisions based on fear. I will never make my decisions based on insecurities. I don't care about any of that shit. To me, that shit is like, there are so many obstacles that will be thrown in front of you in life anyway. Why would you get in your own way? And why would you let what some person who doesn't know you thinks about you affect your decision making? I'm just never going to be that person. I knew if they let me do the thing that I was supposed to do, it would have really worked. But when I got there, it became very apparent that that's not what they wanted to do. So I was like, cool, then I'm just going to do the show. That's TV. Like TV wins, that happens. But it was a great experience for the most part. The crew I worked with, I liked all of them. I really liked them. But you just look back and go, okay, well, this isn't going to work. So that's cool. That didn't bother me so much.
Now, I don't mean to like kind of ruffle feathers, but like, as a young journalist in kind of training, as I will call it, or a young journalist on the fly, when you mentioned the thing that you wanted to do, are you able to get into a little bit of detail of what that is? Okay, no, that's fine. It's just
no, you can ask it. No,
yeah.
Honestly, no, it's not that it was like a thing. There was a thing, but it was more. The one thing that I had done. This is what a lot of people didn't realize about that job, because I remember. And it's hard to say this because you don't ever want to, it's never about being cocky. It's never about bragging, but it's about being confident in your ability, right?
Absolutely.
By the time I got to that show, I was the most experienced person to ever start hosting Hockey Night in Canada. In that, Ron was like 26. Dave Hodge was 26. Like, they were young. They were great. Yeah. They are great. But like, by the time I got to that show, like, I knew how to host a show.
Yeah.
And so there was a guy who said to me, one of the on-air guys said to me, hey, listen, you're not from the hockey world, da, 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 da. And I said to him, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. I'm not playing hockey. I'm hosting a show.
Yeah.
I've been doing this longer than you've been doing this, right?
Yeah.
So what they didn't do was here's what I think. Hockey Night in Canada is this really important national tradition. It needed to evolve. It needed to grow. You watched what happened. They blew themselves up with racism last year because they were ill-equipped to handle real things, right? So I believe what happened was the cable sports crew didn't really respect what the tradition in CBC means, right? They didn't, and that's what I've said this to them. So I'm not speaking out of school here.
Yeah, no worries.
So when you, like, I was the only person on that team who had actually done a national cultural show. I don't mean the on-air people. The on-air guys were great. They had, everybody filled a role, right? I'm talking about like the movement. So what we were supposed to do was evolve the show, prepare the show. Like, that's why when all that racism stuff happened, which had been happening for a long time, like, that's why it blew up, because it's the same crew of people that have been telling that story for a long time. And I mean behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't, I was trying to take it to a place where it would never have had that problem, but that's not what they wanted. That's not what they wanted. And it was obviously very different. It was a very different crew of people. And the guy that brought me on board ended up leaving.
Yeah.
So then I knew, it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to stay here. I came to work with him. Yeah. He's gone, so that'll be the end of this for me too.
And like I don't mean like to kind of pinpoint it on you or say like, okay, well, like this was a failure on his part, because it's not. Like, everything is a learning curve. I believe Letterman, and I think it's either Letterman or Stewart, says like, without failure you're not going to have success. So you want to fail. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but it's just like they could have put anybody in that shoes that just came out. Like, if they put Rick Campanelli or someone that wasn't a hockey background person, it's going to have the same aspect, just because in my mind, it was almost like the older generation that are watching this are so comfortable with Ron MacLean. Okay. He knows the hockey book inside and out. So you're going to get this guy that I've never heard of, never probably laced up skates coming in. And I'm not saying you haven't, obviously Canadian laced up skates somewhere, but just not to the aspect of the MacLean background. So no matter who was coming in, it was going to be.
Listen, I remember when Dave Hodge was taking off Hockey Night in Canada, and I remember how much they killed Ron. The only difference was Twitter, right? It's a different culture. That's all. It's just a different world. And there are, one day I'll tell the real story, like the detailed story of all the things that happened there. Today's not the day, and I haven't told it to this point, right?
No, that's fine. Yeah, but, like I'm not going to pressure you on it.
But like, you can pressure me all you want. Whatever you want. I would never tell you what you ask. Whatever you want. I'm just saying that to do the goal they had in mind, they couldn't get to the way they did it. They couldn't get to the way they did it. That's really what it is. But they could have got to their goal, just not the way not with the things that they put in place, right? Which is totally fair, and they made their choices, and that's fine. Look, in the moment the moment that I got the call to go work there, I was like, this is a bad idea. Because I said to them, you don't want to do what you're asking me to do.
Yeah.
They said, we do. And I said, no, you don't. You don't. And they said, we do. And I said, all right, fuck it. I'll do it. Because why not? And I actually said to them, my first choice for the host of Hockey Night in Canada is Ron. If it's not going to be Ron, my second choice is me. So I'll do it, right? Yeah. But because why not? Like, why not? To host your own late night talk show and then to host Hockey Night in Canada, I really do believe that sports broadcasting has shown, I'm not talking about Hockey Night in Canada here, I'm talking about all of it. Sports broadcasting has shown how profoundly ill-equipped it is for the real talk that's been going on. Watching broadcasters struggle with the Me Too movement. When a player gets accused of groping a woman, watching meaningful broadcasters in America and Canada dismiss the woman's claims and just downplay it. Watching the Black Lives Matter movement, watching broadcasters fucking scramble to be even remotely on point. Yeah. This has been coming for a long time. You see, for you talk about Conan, right? For me, it's Keith Olbermann. So Keith Olbermann, to me, is the guy that gets it right. Keith Olbermann was a sportscaster, a fucking newscaster, a journalist, a radio person, a television person, to me, Keith Olbermann is like the model, right? Yeah. He's the guy that I looked at and was like, that is my favorite. And interestingly enough, the person that reached out to me when I got Hockey Night in Canada was Keith Olbermann. And I didn't know him. I never met him. He reached out to me to say, I love what you're doing, right? Like, he was behind me the whole way. Keith has become a brother now. He's become family to me. And because Keith knew what I was trying to do, right? But like it's like anything. You have these ideas. You want to go get them. And then you look around very quickly and go, oh, I can't build a shed. I can't build a house if you give me tools to build a shed only, right? Yeah. So I was like, all right, well, cool. But the important part is that it doesn't matter how it turned out, right? Because weirdly enough, I know this is going to sound wild because I don't know when this is going to go up, when you're going to air this, but I'm about to launch the biggest show of my career. So to me, like, Hockey Night in Canada wasn't it's like, oh, that's ended. Now what am I going to do? I put it into place right away, and I'm going to launch the biggest show of my career pretty soon, and I'm going to have a whole lot of fun with it because I knew it was coming. Like, I knew that this is all part of the process. It's only with shows like, there are very few shows like Hockey Night in Canada, The Tonight Show. Really, those are the two shows where the brand, it's even like, in a way, Monday Night Football is like, it's a different thing. It doesn't even have the same legacy really that hockey did here. So I knew, like, going into it, it's like, there's no way, and also I knew there was shit going on behind the scenes that if you ever heard about it, you'd be like, oh wow, they did that was crazy, right? Yeah. But I was like, yeah, man, I'm a grown ass person. I can fucking handle this. Yeah. Like, this is a cool thing. I get to host Hockey Night in Canada. I had a blast doing it, right? It was a strange experience in one respect, but it was also awesome in another. Well, like, when you were mentioning a little bit there about, like, the racism, the Me Too movements, and how broadcasters and companies are, like, kind of trying to handle it and whatever. And like, that was to all sports broadcasting. Like, no, and, like, because I was actually going to agree with you on that aspect because, when they had TSNs, I think it's Kayla Gray had about, like, the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think it was someone in Toronto. I don't know if it was a reporter or just, I think it was a reporter, kind of tweeted at her on Twitter, and they went back and forth, and then it was almost like TSN had to come out and more or less say, like, yeah, we're sorry we didn't jump on this earlier. We totally support Kayla. And I'm like, you're only doing that now because, there's enough backlash here. It's like, if you really supported her, you would have, a TSN Twitter would have came in and said, buddy, back off, leave her alone. But look, it's a culture. Yeah. It's a culture that has been profoundly exclusive. And Hockey Night in Canada has had its definite legacy of racism and flaws, for sure. But it has been far more inclusive than cable sports has been.
Yeah.
True in the United States as well. ESPN, far more exclusive. They're more diverse in their hiring for sure. But culturally speaking, you watch them all fucking pound on Colin Kaepernick. Guess he was right. And and I think a lot of it's to do with the fact that, you know, and this is how I truly feel. And to your point about how certain broadcasters or networks come out because of backlash. You intrinsically in your life, in your heart, know that you're either for injustice or against injustice.
Yeah.
And the people who claim to be moderates, that's the most bullshit line ever for a broadcaster, because what it means is you're willing, it's like, you may not be a racist, but racism isn't a deal breaker for you. Right?
Yeah.
Racism is a deal breaker for me. The shit that I used to call them out on when I worked there was real. Like I would say, hey, we don't do that. 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 Because in your core, you have to know, that it's your job. If you're a person in this business who gets a platform, but also if you're a cis male white person in this business, you have been afforded so much privilege, so much luck comes with just being the fact that you're like a white straight guy in this business, right? It is your responsibility to stand up for other people who don't have that privilege.
Yeah.
That's how I believe. And that was never going to fly with the Hockey Night in Canada crowd. But I don't care. I did it anyway, right? And it certainly wasn't going to fly with the crowd. And here's what I would say to them. The crowd would have come on board. Like I said, young people were coming on board. And women were coming on board by ratings. That's what but my bosses told me this, right? So they were going to come on board. It was the industry. And you think I give a shit what a bunch of racist general managers think? I don't care. We're going to outlast them anyway because we were on the right path. Now, I'm not naming anybody in particular. I'm just saying in general, in all sports, right? It's been pretty apparent that racism is rampant in sports, right? Pretty apparent. And I was just like not going to be on that side. I was going to be on the side that was against it. So I knew that I was going to run into issues when I took the job, not because of just my position on race. I'm not saying they're all racist. I'm saying because I had a more progressive worldview. That wasn't really going to be, I didn't think that the management at Rogers was going to be able to hang on for some of the emails they got, right? Because I knew they were going to sort of side with the older, more, whatever crowd. I knew that, but I still was you still got to give it your fight. You got to be there for it.
Absolutely. George, we're almost concluding here at the end. I mean, I've gone, I know we agreed with like 30 minutes, but it was so entertaining that we've kept it going. So hopefully, hopefully it wasn't a bother to you.
Not at all.
But I guess the last question I kind of want to end off here with is like, with all the stuff that you've done with your career, what you're doing now, even with your Strombo show there on CBC, like what, I guess, are some of the highlights and what kind of things do you want to see next coming down the pipeline?
I hosted my dream job show, which was the new music on Much Music. That was the dream job. So anything after that's gravy, right? To be honest with you. The things that I like to do is next are I have a new music thing coming, which I'm really excited about. I have a new film that I co-produced, which I'm really excited about. So I like doing lots of different things. So for me, it's staying vital and constantly moving. You'll hear in this business, especially the more you get entrenched in it, people will tell you to stay in your lane. Fuck that. There are no lanes, right? And it doesn't even matter if the audience comes along with you. Do the thing that you believe in the most. And if that shifts, do that too. So I have, to me, helping the next generation of people do their thing, helping them grow and learn is really exciting to me. So I kind of like doing that on top of doing my new shows, which are coming. So I've had such a lucky and privileged career. I'm so grateful for it. And I know that I'm only like halfway through it. So if I'm lucky. So I got more to come.
Yeah. I like how you look at your watch, like your watch tells you like, yeah, George, you're right here. You're about.
I don't remember what year this has been such a strange year, but I know that it's coming.
Yeah. It's like I was going to say, like, like, George, I thought one of the highlights would be like, I was on this Canadian podcast with this Newfoundland host. He gave me the honor of showing up with a Montreal jersey when he was a Detroit fan. Like, George, what are you doing?
What number's on the back?
I think it's Marner 16. No, I'm only kidding. It's no number. It's just a generic jersey. That's how you play it safe.
On my Instagram post, I think not the last one, but the one before, I had a picture of me and Gordie Howe, and it was for the start of hockey, right? And so I've been able to spend some time with Gordie, and I was always grateful for the time with Gordie, your Red Wing legend. But so I'm wearing a shirt buttoned up. So I said, yo, Gordie, let's take a picture. He said, cool. So I just do that. I surprise him by pointing out the Habs thing. Gordie had a Sharpie in his hand because he was signing autographs for people. Yeah. He went to vandalize my shirt. So that's what that photo is, because he was like, oh, you got, like, Gordie was such a great guy, man, such a great spirit. So I always fuck with Gordie. I used to fuck with him and Bobby Orr, because Bobby Orr was a dirty Bruin. He used to come up to me, he's like, where's the dirty Hab? And I loved that. So that's what that photo was, me and the Red Wing legend Gordie Howe, was me surprising him with a Habs jersey, because I know how much he hated a logo, because I know how much he hated the Habs back in the day.
Well, it's funny because just to kind of conclude it on this is when I was, I believe 16 or it could have been 14 or 16, I was in the hospital with a seizure. And I think Bobby Orr had come to like whatever it's like the Ghouls Arena to sign stuff. And I was so pissed because I wasn't able to go. So my brother brought down, I think you could buy like 8x10s or whatever. So he bought one of those, got Bobby Orr to sign it. And then he brought, I think it was like a Chicago jersey, and it didn't have his name on the back. It was like one of my old brother's one. And my parents were like, don't give that to Bobby Orr. Like, he's not going to sign that. What are you doing? And my brother was like, yeah, but who cares? If he signs it, great. If he doesn't, like, who gives a shit? He's only here for like.
He played for the Hawks.
Yeah, exactly. So but it's not like it wasn't his name. And he signed it, like he signed it wrong, like to Brian with an I. But apparently the encounter was like, this isn't me. This isn't my name on the back. And he's like, yeah, I know, but it's for my brother. He's sick, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, fuck it, whatever. Like, to Brian, best of luck, Bobby Orr. And I just wanted, like, if I was ever in that situation, look at the name on the back and be like, and remember, I was better than this guy. Like, at least then you'd have it on the jersey for life. But I thought
I have been asked to sign many Leaf jerseys in my life, and I always draw a Canadiens logo on it.
Oh, see, that's what I do. Like, if someone came up to me and was like, can you sign this like Avalanche jersey or this Joe? Like, I love Joe Sakic, no question. Like, great Canadian hockey player. But if someone came up and like, Brian, here's a Colorado thing, or at least something they know you don't like, I'd be like, no problem. I know you want my signature for it. Not at this point in my career, but who knows? But I'd like just minor detail on it just so that they know, like, you brought the wrong thing to me.
Sakic was amazing, but to me, he was still a Quebec Nordique. So the Avalanche, I just think, are the extension of the Nordiques, and they were the real rivalry. So as a Habs fan, the Bruins and the Leafs are of course big rivals, but the real great rivalry for us were the Nords.
Yeah. Well, George, thanks so much for hopping on and taking the time to do the podcast. I mean, like, I guess while I got you here, while you're in the hot seat, I'm going to pitch an idea that I come on your show. No, I'm only kidding. Imagine you just have like a show. It's like, this guy, I was on his show, now we got to do mine. And then people will be like, geez, he's really struggling there.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to George Stroumboulopoulos for coming on the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thank you for listening and good night.